Yeah, I don't want to be all racist, but I don't exactly want to get blown out of the sky by some terrorists either.
I would really not be screaming that at the top of your lungs.
We've seen that Degrassi has always tackled controversial subjects. The show has always been progressive and they've tried their best, but certain times...
That show, it's irresponsible.
And it's okay to say that there are places they could have done better, and this is the discussion I want to have. I'll be talking about racism and how it also probably impacted the way characters were focused on. As someone who isn't white, I'll have certain opinions that some might not be able to understand on a personal level, but try to hear me out because it's important that we talk about all the problems with racism in Degrassi and how it impacted the focus of characters and people of color. I like a lot of the characters of color that are added to Degrassi, so that doesn't mean that this is going to be me completely picking apart everything Degrassi got wrong. It's more about analyzing how people of color are depicted in the show and how they are portrayed by the writers and showrunners, who are people that most likely are all white. I've always been fascinated by this because I love this show, and it's fine if we look at places that they could have improved on. I think Degrassi has done some decent plots depicting racial profiling. We saw it when Liberty's sorority was specifically looking for a black girl who joined their sorority.
I was wondering if you could help us out with some hip-hop moves for tonight's lip sync.
So they're making some assumption. They think I'm from an underprivileged background. Maybe they're just excited to have someone who's a little different.
Well, they should be excited to have a Liberty.
Most of the time, sororities are mostly white for many cultural reasons, being that black people weren't granted an education to college until way after white people. Most of the time, the ones that can afford to go to college are white people with money, and although Liberty does come from a fairly comfortable background, she's clearly being picked because of diversity and inclusion, and the college now needing to mandate diversity.
So, which one of you two is going to be the one?
Because we only need one.
One what?
What Shannon means is we're seeking diversity.
Our funding depends upon it.
So that's all I am to you, a token.
You see, if we don't encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion, black and brown people will still be excluded from opportunities. It makes sense that these white girls would be looking for the black girl that they can easily use for their diversity quota. When Liberty talks about how JT died, they assume it's because of gang violence.
The toughest time in my life would be when I had to give my baby up for adoption.
Was the father supportive?
He died. He was stabbed.
In a gang fight?
It's amazing. You grew up like that and ended up here. You didn't have the privileges we did, but you overcame the odds. It would be great to have someone with your perspective in Pi Gamma Pi.
Danny, Liberty's brother, was introduced in season 4, and he's alright as a character. He was really just introduced as Liberty's goofball brother that hangs out with JT. He matures over time, but he doesn't really get any plots that make him feel like a character on a deeper level. He's pushed to the wayside, and it sucks because they could have written more plot lines for Danny, but he's just a little underdeveloped and boring. They do have a plot line with Danny where he experiences prejudice from a manager at a department store that holds her own biases towards black people.
But I'll be watching your homeboy over there.
Homeboy? What the hell was that?
You're paranoid. Oh, just a joke.
Okay, gangster. This is done in 10 and then out.
When Derek puts underwear in his bag, he gets caught by a woman who already was eyeing him down the entire time.
Up. Your bag. Open them.
You didn't search the other guys.
Well, I had every reason to trust them. You people always have a scam. Tell the police your sob story again, no doubt.
Danny eventually calls Derek out for what he did.
Did you think of what that racist manager would do when she found it?
Whoa, no, dude. It was just a joke. Really, it was just a joke.
It's never a joke when a black guy gets caught with stuff in his bag. You just don't get it.
And in my opinion, this is where their friendship really never recovered. From this point on, they weren't really as close as they were, even though the episode did leave it open. We'd see them talk occasionally, but they weren't best buds anymore. I'm not saying that this event is what caused it or that it was intentional on the writer's part, but when you watch the show back, it really feels like this event is what kind of ended Danny and Derek's friendship. There's also other moments where Degrassi handles racial profiling, like when there's a bomb scare at the mall. The police racially profile all the black men despite skin tone, height, or body size.
A policeman told me I matched the description and brought me here.
Well, we look nothing alike. They're only stopping black guys? This is freaking racial profiling.
Or criminal profiling. Someone did do it.
Yeah, but neither of us did.
And Dallas picks up on what's going on, and his anger gets the better of him at points. I understand his anger for being seen as a criminal, and I think I like the way Dallas is depicted and his reactions to being racially profiled.
Thank you. Yeah, nothing.
Pardon me?
So why did you pull me over?
The exhaust is very loud.
Thanks for letting me know. I mean, you can't be giving me a ticket for that, right?
You the registered owner of this vehicle?
It belongs to my guardian.
I'm not asking you, son.
Stay in the SUV that I must have stolen. How about you come over here and kiss my black ass?
He could have heard you.
I don't care. We've been stopped 2 times today for nothing. No reason other than our race.
Is that true?
Wake up, Connor. We're being persecuted here. We haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to go to a freaking science fair, man.
Don't make me repeat myself.
He's hurt and angry, and this affects his judgment at the science fair and nearly gets Allie disqualified.
This is my partner, Mike Dallas.
See, partner, told you.
Well, we don't seem to have your name on this project.
How convenient.
Impressive.
What's impressive? My vocabulary? I happen to know a plethora of large words.
No, your tone is a bit rude, young man.
I wonder why that is.
Your partner has learned a little respect for the process.
When I learn a little respect, you tried to kick me out earlier because I'm a black man in a place you didn't think I should be.
He has a really nice talk with Allie's father about an experience that he had being profiled at an airport when trying to leave the country for a wedding, and because he was detained, they missed it. It's really infuriating to hear about because this type of shit happens all the time to innocent people just trying to live their lives like everyone else.
Sitting in that room, I felt so wronged and helpless. I was the angriest I've ever been in my whole life. I wanted to hit someone, but I didn't. The world is terribly, terribly unfair sometimes.
I can't turn a blind eye to racism. I won't.
The question isn't whether to fight, but how.
I honestly think Dallas is one of the better depicted black people on the show because they focus on his development and becoming more responsible. He's also flawed, cocky, and can take things way too far, but he's also remorseful, and it's interesting to see how he learns to be a better person for his son and for Allie. Characters like Jimmy and Dave probably had the most depth of black characters on Degrassi, but there are also many problems with how black characters are depicted in the show. Most of them come from wealthier backgrounds. Jimmy, Liberty, Danny, Shay. They seem like they live fairly comfortably, which isn't a problem. Some black families just have more money, but I did notice it becoming a trend with black characters that they gave any focus to. It's almost like these characters were written like this so the writers wouldn't really have to delve into intersections of poverty and race and class. It also can feel like if this is the only depiction of black people, it gives the impression that there are only one type of right black people versus the bad type of black people. Many of the black characters on the show don't feel culturally connected to being black because they aren't the focus of the storyline most of the time. There is a long trope of the black character being the sidekick in media. I want to read an excerpt here because it perfectly describes how these characters become tokens instead of fully realized characters. The assistant can be coined as the magical Negro or the black best friend. In other words, black characters merely existed to assist and elevate non-POC storylines. This deprives the audience of a chance to truly understand various black teen perspectives. In Degrassi, characters like Hazel and Shantae didn't get a backstory as much as other characters. Hazel served as Paige's sidekick, and Shantae was mainly the popular crew's sidekick and barely got screen time. Even the later seasons, Marisol didn't have a developed storyline and existed to add drama to the mix. Jimmy, aka Drake, while being a prominent character, later on merely existed to advance Spinner's storyline. Not to mention Spinner is the same best friend that played a role in Jimmy getting shot, which is how he gets paralyzed in the first place. I also want to talk about the black excellent trope because I think that Degrassi uses this quite a bit. I have a very personal connection to this since I was always expected to do well by my family and those around me, and I always felt pressure to keep up with white students to prove my worth. Even when I was in college, it felt that I had to prove myself a lot harder as an intelligent black woman, and this impacted me, and I imagine a lot of other people can relate to this experience or the pressure as a black person. But this becomes a problem when most of the black characters are depicted this way, and there really isn't much nuance that comes along with it. Liberty is depicted like this, and don't get me wrong, Liberty does have more to her. She's smart, logical to the point of it being a flaw sometimes. She also has a sense of doing what's right and cares a lot about others, and we learn that she struggles with dyscalculia, although it doesn't really get focused on that much later, but I still don't think Liberty was focused on as much as other characters though. But I can't say that she was completely a background character either. She's intelligent, sympathetic, and compassionate.
Would it be okay if I took home some decorations after the dance? Isabel's birthday's coming up, and parties can be expensive.
Say no more. Oh, and FYI, there are more Alloons Bay in the closet clay.
Uh-huh. Thanks, you're an lifesaver, Lay.
Like other interracial couples in Degrassi, JT and Liberty aren't focused on as much. Probably the most of the interracial couples on the list here, but not as much as the white couples on the show. She gets pregnant with JT's baby, which again, some people have complained of that being a stereotype because young teen pregnancy is a stereotype, black baby mama, and I don't think her getting pregnant as a teen is necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's handled fairly well and depicted the struggles of being a teen parent before she ultimately decides to give her child up, and it is a really sad thing. I don't think it's really explored that much though. Liberty as a character doesn't really get many plot lines, especially in the latter half of her time on the show. I think she is also used to assisting white characters in a way as well. We don't see Liberty hang out with Emma and Manny that much, but the show sometimes expects us to think that the relationship was closer than it was. But there is something there with the character that I feel deserves to be recognized. I just don't think that she gets as much in-depth focus as other characters. Jimmy is a character that is most prominent on the show for obvious reasons.
I wasn't rushing, difference in ages. You're old enough, but you're still a baby. I need an adult. I need an adult.
I like Jimmy as a character. He's funny, he's a nice kid, sympathetic, understanding, open-minded, and he's also flawed and can be petty and childish at times and get ahead of himself. We get a decent amount of plots with him, and he struggles to deal with being paralyzed after being shot. We do get a bit of focus on that, but I also think that, like with Liberty, by season 6 and 7, they weren't really doing much with Jimmy. We'd see him in physical therapy sometimes. Most of his appearances did seem to be wrapped around Spinner's plots during the end of his run, and that kind of sucks. Even at the beginning, he seemed like he was Spinner's rich best friend. The focus always seemed to be more on Spinner after Jimmy got shot and how he's coping with everything, but the balance with how Jimmy copes with being shot doesn't feel as equal. That isn't to negate everything they've done with the character, but Jimmy also doesn't feel as connected with his black culture. Even when we see glimpses of his home life, his parents are stereotypical overworkers that have no time for him. His father ends up being an asshole that cheats on his wife, but again, no real recognition of race when it comes to Jimmy as a character. That doesn't mean that it has to be the case for every character that we recognize race, but I also want to acknowledge that this becomes a problem and a pattern with the people of color on this show, especially the black characters. Most of the depictions of black parents on this show are, for lack of a better word, whitewashed, and when we have the same depictions of black parents, it starts to send a message about how the show might see the ideal black family. Connor was also introduced to us through Mr. Simpson as his godson, but we don't ever learn more about his family or his circumstances outside of learning he was diagnosed with Asperger's. I think Connor is the only character with a diagnosed mental disorder, or a character they even attempt to explore mental health with at all, that's a person of color. Aside from maybe arguing Esme, but that's debatable since she was never really diagnosed with a mental health disorder. On top of that, I don't think that any of the people of color that I talk about are LGBTQ plus at all, which is just wow. None, guys, really? Actually, I lied. There is one character of color that is LGBT, Zane, but he's also just a side character, not really a main character, even though he's credited as a main character. He doesn't have any storylines of his own that don't revolve around Riley. We don't learn really anything about his home life. We don't really learn much about Zane outside of being gay and with Riley. And this won't be the last time that we see that Asian characters aren't included in Degrassi as much as white characters. They really seem to have a huge problem with intersectionality. Connor gets a few plot lines to himself, but towards the end of the show, he really starts to become more of a background character. It's sad because I liked how Connor was depicted in the show, being socially unaware of his surroundings and making mistakes because of it, and also constantly trying to understand social norms is very interesting to me. He can also be very funny of a character, and he definitely had an upgrade. He went from nerd to Chad. He and Jenna are in a relationship, but like I've said before, we don't see much focus on that, and that becomes a huge problem when all the interracial couples on this show barely get any focus. Even Allie and Dallas didn't really get much time dedicated compared to other couples. Dave is another black character that gets more screen time and plots. I think out of all the black characters, Dave might be the one that gets the most explored, especially after he cheats on Allie and faces the consequences of what happened with Jacinta, the girl he cheated on Allie with. I also think they have Dave grow a lot during this time on the show and learn a lot from others to become a better person overall. The actor eventually left the show and Dave was no longer in it and didn't have a send-off. I think even though Dave had more plot lines than other people of color on the show, he still didn't have as much as the white characters like Claire, for instance. Colorism is a very complicated topic and it's hard to fully understand, especially if you have never experienced it, but prejudice does exist, and especially in media here it seems to be a preference for lighter skinned black people, and this can ultimately affect how darker skinned black people get roles and characters being depicted in general. And then this creates a bias towards lighter skinned black characters, which were clearly more prioritized and even preferred over the darker skinned characters. And it will become clear in a few minutes. I don't think we really see any characters on Degrassi that are biracial or identify that way. We don't see any interracial couples that are parents in this show, and I think that Degrassi could have explored multiracial families because they do exist a lot more nowadays. Maybe I personally feel this way because I'm biracial and grew up with a white parent, and that has caused a fair share of problems between me and my family members because of that. But I feel that it is important to include biracial people in the narrative. I mentioned Danny before, but we also have Shantae, if you can even call her a main character, because she never had any plot lines. Oh no, actually she had one plot line where she put sticky notes on Mr. Simpson's car because she was mad about the stricter rules. I only think this plot line exists because someone was aware that Shantae was the most unused character, and it would become noticeable if she wasn't given at least one. She's mostly known as being the nosy character, looking for a story. When Danny and Leia start having problems, she tries to help Leia, but she likes Danny and it ends up going badly for Leia. Then there's this petty plotline where Danny didn't want to split the bill.
So $4 each?
Your latte was more than my macchiato, so plus tax you owe $5.25.
Are you serious?
It's only fair, right?
Bruh.
Then Shantae wrote about it for some reason. They eventually work it out, and I'm just sitting there like, is there really nothing else they can think to do with these characters? It's so basic and bland. Shantae is really a token character, and it sucks because she was introduced earlier on and has been used as a background character, a black token character, for multiple seasons. Marisol also serves that role for Katie, who gets more plot lines than her. She isn't really a main character as much as a side character. She's okay, but it's hard to pinpoint her core personality traits. I mean, she cares about her friend Katie. She's petty when she nearly triggers Katie to start making herself throw up. I mean, she apologizes for that, but it's all over a boy and it's over Drew. It's kind of fucked up. Marisol is also kind of superficial and a little demanding, but she becomes a little bit more likable by the end of her time, but there really isn't much that they do with her. Marisol starts dating Mo later on, and this is another interracial couple that is barely focused on in the show. I researched more about Keisha, the actress LaToya Webb, who apparently posted a video explaining her experiences with a horrible agent. This video is privated, so I couldn't access it, but from what I gathered, she didn't have an agent that advocated for her, and the producers and casting directors probably didn't really fight for LaToya to stay on the show, since they didn't really bother giving her any plot lines anyway. It really shows how unconscious bias plays a role in which characters are prioritized over which ones aren't. Mostly white writers that don't really have cultural understanding of different ethnicities or races. It makes sense they would stick to characters they can write plot lines for, but that doesn't excuse them from not trying harder to understand and make time to focus on other characters, especially people of color, because the opportunity to be a main character role is hard harder to achieve. Tiny is introduced as Zig's friend, mainly only being the side character to Zig and his plot with the gang and his connection to it. Even though Tiny is the one that is related to Vince, I thought this was a very interesting thing that they ended up making Tiny Vince's brother because they have connected characters before, but I found it interesting because Vince was a villain character to the show, and it was an interesting way to introduce a character we would get to know. Vince is brought back briefly and we get some insight into Tiny's home life.
My dad's in prison. My mom's so high most of the time she barely remembers my name. This was all I had. He took care of me.
Which, albeit, is fairly stereotypical for a black character, coming from a broken home, drug addict, family, gang-related, and I don't find it coincidental that they make the darker-skinned black main character gang-related and none of the lighter-skinned ones, but I'm not that upset if a character has a traumatic past as long as they expand upon it and explore the character. The show kind of rerouted and made Tiny more interested in science in the next class, and there's nothing really wrong with that necessarily, but we never really saw anything beforehand that showed that he was even related or interested to science in the slightest. So we again see them molding this character into the black excellent character, the strapping, smart black character. Instead of focusing on the gang life that he was involved in, we never see him revisit or dealing with the trauma of what Vince put him through. We don't see Vince again. We could have seen so much more of this character and explored more of Tiny's past and trauma, but we just don't. And oh boy, I have a lot to say about Hazel, and please excuse me if I seem angrier than I have, but after doing some research, I have become honestly infuriated with the entire situation. Hazel was introduced early on, and she, like a lot of other darker skinned characters, mostly exists to be the black friend to the white character that has plot lines. Hazel is someone that is judgmental, cares about what people think, can be a little superficial, but she knows who she is, and honestly, I think that the character is such wasted potential, especially after she does get her own plotline about her Somali heritage. Hazel, who is afraid of being judged as Somali, pretends to be from Jamaica for the cultural festival, and she is also seen bullying someone wearing a hijab.
But you guys want a real fashion crime? Do you think there may be bald under there? You're under arrest. Crime terrorist sheet. Well, just like that, what do you expect?
That student's display is destroyed, and this creates a discussion about the hate crime that happened. Hazel has to also confront her own internalized racism when she is suspected of being the person that destroyed the display. Eventually, it's revealed that it was two other boys that did it, but Hazel still feels conflicted because she knows that she should be proud of who she is as someone from Somalia.
My name is Hazel Aden, and I was born in Mogadishu, Somalia, not Jamaica. And yes, I'm a Muslim. My mom came here first with me to flee a civil war. My dad, who was fighting the war, came late. Fariza wears that headscarf thing. How can you don't? It's a hijab, and I do when I go to mosque, but to take it on full time is a personal and important decision. Unlike you guys, I was ashamed of who I am, but not anymore.
I really like this episode because we see how Hazel was impacted when she was bullied and harassed for being accused of being a terrorist. We have to also remember that this episode came out in the wake of 9/11, which may be what inspired the episode, but it's especially ahead of its time to discuss Islamophobia, especially right after a national tragedy, and when the statistics for Islamophobia are going up after October 7th. I have to say Degrassi did a good job with this episode, and it made me look at Hazel completely differently, and it upsets me that they didn't do more with this character after this. It's very disappointing that the show only wanted one plot line for this character, because I felt like we could have seen so much more of her insecurities, because that type of thing doesn't just go away after one episode. It's not just a one and done, and that's my main problem with how race is depicted in the show. The experiences that characters have don't really carry over and affect them in other episodes. They're usually a one and done, and it's upsetting because I think they could have taken an opportunity to show how racism does impact characters in a more nuanced way, but I want to give the show credit when it does depict controversial subjects like this. I'm going to read Andrea's experience and then a response from an executive, and I have a lot to say about the executive's response specifically and what it says about people unwilling to see the perspective or experience of a person of color. I was very blessed to grow up on television. My longest gig was on the show Degrassi: The Next Generation, where I had the chance to play the character Hazel for 6 seasons. I had an amazing experience on Degrassi. I was a teenager on top of the world. I traveled, I met fantastic people, and I started to develop a fan base. There wasn't much more I could ask for. Actually, I lied. There was a few more things I could ask for, and that was mainly to get a chance in my 6-year run of being on the show. I only had one major storyline around my character, and all the other episodes I was the token dose of color or a glorified extra. This experience was incredibly frustrating for me. I was on the show when I was just starting to recognize my own potential and let my imagination run free, and so the last thing I wanted was to be stifled creatively on a major platform. Whenever I would talk to the executives about ideas I had or expanding my character in any way, I would always get shut down or pushed to the side. I worked on an album with Universal Canada while doing the show to get out some of my creative frustration, and suggested to some of the people at Degrassi to let me sing, and instead they made my character a bad singer. LOL. It's easy for me to laugh at the ridiculousness of that now, but at the time it wasn't funny at all. I used to think I was crazy while being on the show because as much as I would be included in episodes and advertising campaigns, it always felt like there was another force trying to shut me out. I ignored it though, tried my best to continue to plead my case for why I believe my character should be developed a bit more, and continued to do my best on the show and be grateful for the opportunity. So many people had pointed out to me that as a black girl in Canada, it was great to see my face on the screen, and so I continued on. Recently, I had a conversation with a filmmaker in Canada who had worked with me while I was on Degrassi, and he unfortunately confirmed to me the feelings that I had always had, but never wanted to admit to. Degrassi had an issue with my race. He told me how the writers and producers had no intentions of developing the storylines of my character unless it was to enhance the story of one of the other white characters. They had some plans of some of the other black characters on the show for their ideas were only to cover the usual stereotypes that we see of people of color on television: teen pregnancy, petty theft, basketball, broken family homes, etc. And he usually had to fight with them to think out of the box with those characters to not have them go down the road of the usual cliches. He told me to get them to do the one major storyline that my character had was like pulling teeth, and after a few more years of working on the show, he had to leave because of the blatant hierarchy system that they had in place, and he couldn't work with people who didn't share the same beliefs. This conversation hurt me, but it didn't surprise me. I knew I wasn't crazy all those years, and it sucks to think that there are people who think like this and treat kids this way, but unfortunately, this is the world we live in. I'm always offended that I read or hear someone say Hazel was my least favorite character, or Hazel didn't do shit on the show. I recognize that Hazel is not me, and I shouldn't take it to heart, but it always stings just a bit because I know that Hazel and myself never got a chance to shine on the show for very ugly reasons. TV land in the entertainment business is a tough place. It's sad to think that we still live in a world where we have to fight for equal rights, whether it be for marriage or just to get a storyline on a TV show. At the end of the day, I would have loved to see some things done differently while I was on Degrassi, but I was still grateful for my opportunity because it helped me in many ways for my career. The experience on that show has strengthened me and inspired me to keep fighting and working my damnedest to change someone's perspective on women of color, and inspired a lot of my ideas for my web series Black Actress. No one said the journey was going to be easy, and that's what keeps it interesting. If I can learn to turn a negative into a positive, I think I'm going the right way. Now keep in mind how respectful and thoughtful Andrea's response was when I read to you what I'm about to read to you. As one of the executives Andrea is referring to, I need to set the record straight. To start, this insider that she was referring to does not exist. There is no director on the show who fits this description. Degrassi, like all TV shows, is run by writers and producers. Directors have literally zero input on scripts or character arcing. Television is a writer's medium, and directors are never consulted on important issues like characters or storylines. This director she is referring to as an insider with insight into creative matters does not exist, period.
You already said that.
Degrassi is highly democratic. Almost every actor/character on Degrassi is given a chance to shine, often given more than one opportunity in fact. It's up to the actor to nail it, and if they do, they're given more. It's just that simple. Most characters on Degrassi were conceived as sidekicks or love interests. JT, Jimmy, Darcy, Ellie, Spinner, JT,
Dude, you already said that, don't you remember?
Manny, Danny, Derek, Eli, Alex, and many others were all sidekicks or love interests at first. Darcy is a perfect example. She was given one line in the car wash episode and jumped out immediately as a star and was brought back to do more, and the character of Darcy grew and grew. Spinner is another perfect example of a sidekick who was so awesome we just had to give him more and more. It would surprise the fans to learn that almost every big Degrassi character came about in this accidental way. Toby, Terry, Emma, and Ashley were supposed to be the leads of the show, and they were all pushed aside by the sidekicks of JT, Paige, Manny, Jimmy, Spinner, Ellie, and on and on. That's how the show works. If you're awesome, you're given more to do. If you're lame, you're given less.
No, don't like that.
Andrea was given a strong A plot to run within the second season. Her performance was flat, and the episode Don't Believe the Hype was a dud.
I know how hard it is to be Muslim, especially now.
How? You're Jamaican, remember?
My name, Aden, you said before it sounded Somalian. My name sounds Somalian because it is. That's what I am.
I know.
At my last school, I got cornered by these girls. One of them held me, the other hit me. Call me a terrorist.
Her performance was flat.
He just made the list.
Of course, some people loved Hazel, but the average fan did not clamor for more Hazel eps. If they had, we would have delivered them. In contrast, Jimmy was a character who was given a chance to shine. At first, he wasn't great. I was one of the insiders who pushed to keep him alive and give him more to do. And over time, Aubrey grew as an actor and started killing it. Look at Jimmy in season 1 and again at Jimmy in season 3. And it's night and day. The actor worked at his craft and improved and was rewarded. Andrea did not work at her craft, but still, she was given a few chances to shine, and she didn't. She never knocked it out of the park, and if she had, she would have had many more storylines. It's just that simple. If you're awesome and the fans love you, you get more episodes.
No, don't like that.
If Andrea is bitter, she can blame the fans who never wanted more of her. I know it is easier on the ego to blame racism than to admit your own shortcomings. What Andrea needs to know is that as an actress, she didn't kill it. She always seemed to think that she deserved to be the star at all times, and could be very difficult on set. Andrea was by no means the only diva on set, but she was among the most disruptive. A number of directors, hell, all of them, complained about how disruptive she was on set, and her bad attitude could make it more difficult for other actors to focus and perform. If she was a spectacular actor, all of this would be forgiven, as bad behavior often is forgiven. But if you're a subpar performer playing a character that few fans like, and you have a terrible attitude, and are disruptive on set, and are selfish and egotistical, and a total diva, well, Andrea has nobody to blame but herself. And if she is truly so brilliant as an actor / performer, where has she been in the last 7 years? Her co-star at the time, Drake, has done rather well for himself. Many of her co-stars have gone on to find fame elsewhere, but Andrea has done nothing. Finally, as an insider on the show during Andrea's years, I can't stress enough how sensitive we were to issues of cultural diversity. Indeed, Degrassi has won many awards for its sensitivity, from multiple GLAAD Media Awards to a recent Peabody Award, which is the highest honor for television. Our record stands for itself. This person seems really defensive about Andrea recounting her own experience on the show. She also brings up characters that started out as sidekicks, mostly white characters, if you noticed. I don't think they recognized that while they were writing this. And I thought the Emmy was the highest award that you could win for TV. Just because Andrea might have spoken out about things doesn't make her a diva. And let's remember that Andrea was a teenager at the time, and to compare anybody to Drake and his success is just completely unfair and just not a fair ground at all. In all of this time, this person is just arguing and denying this person's experience as a black person on set. Also, the episode wasn't a dud. It was a really powerful episode about Islamophobia, something that this person probably knows nothing about and doesn't care about. The way this person looks at characters and bases focus on fan favorites is also part of the problem, because bias is going to exclude people of color, like these characters were a lot of the time. Like I said, said the lighter skinned characters had more focus, so I'm not surprised that Jimmy was the one character that was mentioned that was black. And this entire response feels like someone defensive and unwilling to learn or accept criticism, and also reads like basic PR. Look how many awards we won. Who the hell cares? People felt excluded. Kids shouldn't be referred to as being lame or unpopular. You should focus on everyone equally. Let's remember that they were teenagers at the time. It's horrible that the executives and producers didn't really value these teens. And if the executives and producers were anything like this person, then it really explains a lot about Andrea's experience. And I absolutely believe her over whoever this ignorant person is. I doubt that Andrea Lewis would ever see this video, but if she does by some small chance, I just want to say that I am very sorry that you couldn't have had a better experience on the show, and I appreciate the character that Hazel deserved to be. If there's one thing I do like about the next class is that the show seems to be more aware and educated about racial inequities. There are certain plot lines that feel thoughtful and well enough executed, even if I have some minor complaints along the way. I know Lola was added before the next class, and I'm going to admit I wasn't a huge fan of this character, but I think that she really grew on me as a person because she matured, and her bubbly personality kind of grows on you after a while. She is the only prominent Latina on the show. There is no really Hispanic representation or Latin American representation on the show as well, and it's very odd to me. I think Lola is a very sympathetic person and becomes more mature over time. I really liked Lola's character because she's also a really good friend to Yael when they are discovering their gender identity, and even helps them learn more about non-binary and gender fluid. Lola is open-minded and has had her own struggles. I wish that we got to see more of Lola's relationship to her father because I really began to like her character, and I really wanted to see more of her relationship with Saad because I really thought that they were cute. The big racial plot line that people probably remember from the next class is the Frankie storyline, where she and the entire volleyball team except for Shay drew them as animals, including one of the black teammates as a monkey. Because of this, the other team decides not to play against their team, and this creates a conflict with other schools when Frankie's privilege keeps her from seeing why people are offended with this prank.
I just wanted to show everyone that I'm not racist. It's not who I am, and I really hate the idea of people seeing me that way. I only drew the gorilla because your school is called the zoo.
People call us that because we're a poor crime-ridden area. They're calling us animals.
I didn't know that, and it's not how I meant it, so I'm clearly not racist, right? Can you please just tell everyone that I understand now? Really didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings, and I'm really sorry you felt offended.
I think it's handled fairly well, with Frankie having to face her own prejudice before seeing what she did was wrong, and I really appreciated this plotline. It goes over a few episodes and isn't just like a one and done thing. It's really something a character has to go through and really learn. I think the way they have Frankie realize her own unconscious bias as the man approaches her car and then rejects his help and then takes the offer is done very well and realistically. I do wish that they showed Shay being more bothered by what Frankie did instead of being in the middle for a while before being convinced that what she did was wrong. I know this was for educating the audience, so Shay is the character that the information is dumped onto, especially when her father talks to her about the historical significance of equating black people to monkeys. I think that Shay's perspective on this was sidelined because they focused more on Frankie learning from her mistake, and with that comes the issue of black characters being sidelined even when the plotline is about race. Shay as a character is explored but in a fairly superficial way. She's smart and strives to be the best, but I also feel her personality is boring and underdeveloped, so I don't really care as much about her storylines. When Syrian refugees start attending Degrassi, we are introduced to two characters, Saad and Rasha. One seems to adjust fairly well to Degrassi while the other doesn't. I like Rasha as a character, but she's mostly just introduced to be the love interest for Zoe, and I do think she falls more on the bland side. There are some things that I like about her. She's quirky, she likes High School Musical, she's confident about who she is, but there isn't like too much to her as a person because they didn't really have time to explore it. I always thought that Saad was more interesting than the next class gave him credit for. He's very standoffish, isolated from those around him because of his interests. He seems to have a lot more responsibilities at home and also doesn't have the best support system for his loneliness and isolation living in a new country. When he and Maya start taking some fairly disturbing pictures together, we see how it kind of gives a release for Saad to be able to express the horrors he's witnessed. I doubt he has a therapist he can talk with about this, and there seems to be a lot of trauma that the character holds on to. He doesn't really make friends easily, and we see more of that in season 4. When Shay and Saad both try to get a job at Lola's cantina, some money goes missing from the tip jar, and immediately Lola thinks it's Saad, of course, instead of Shay. When Lola finds out it was Shay, she apologizes and feels bad for what she did. We also see that Lola tries to learn more from Saad's perspective after the bombing in Belgium that killed 32 people. When everyone starts showing their support for Belgians, Saad starts feeling conflicted since he doesn't see the same type of support for those killed in Syria and in the Middle East in general.
A lot of people are dying in the world. My village was bombed too. My house, our farm, my school, gone. My friends, gone. It happens all over the world. I can't wear one shirt and not the other.
No idea.
Because it happened in Syria, not in Paris, not in Belgium, not in America.
When he tries speaking out publicly, people start getting defensive and think that Saad is justifying the actions of the suicide bombers.
It's stupid to think that. So we're all stupid? I didn't say that. What I was trying to say is people are dying everywhere, not just in Belgium. One country doesn't deserve more sympathy than another.
So you're saying that Belgium doesn't matter?
There have been anti-Muslim rallies in Belgium. Strangers attacking Muslim citizens. Terror is terror. This is why none of us should be wearing this shirt.
You don't know what you're saying.
Because I'm not from here? Because I'm different? Don't stand in ignorance. That makes you just...
This brings up a more nuanced discussion of how Americans value lives. Americans and the wider Western world don't experience terror in the same way. Specifically, if we're talking about the Middle East, where many countries have been occupied, invaded, and colonized by America and other nations. This has been a problem for all of America's history, and because we don't experience terror like this that often, when something like 9/11 or the bombing in Brussels happens, it shocks the Western world more because we're used to bombing the Middle East. We're used to fighting them. We've normalized doing it, so we don't see it as a bad thing. And it is a bad thing. People are dying. It doesn't help that we don't report on any of this much, especially when it happens to the Middle East, compared to when tragedy hits Western countries. Look at what's happening in Palestine. I actually thought that Saad's point of view mirrored the feelings that many have over the conflict in Israel and Palestine. After the October 7th attack, we saw more sympathy for Israel than for the Palestinians suffering for decades under Israeli occupation. They are now being deprived of basic human rights, and children are dying at really high rates and being deprived of food. Saad's perspective is understandable. His anger and frustration towards ignorant Americans makes sense. No one really tries to see Saad's perspective on things because Americans have never really had to experience the suffering that others have in circumstances where their countries have been colonized and under occupation of other nations for decades. I don't think Saad is trying to defend the actions of the people that killed those in Brussels, but he is saying that Americans don't value life equally, and that's a huge problem. I really appreciate Degrassi for bringing up this subject in a very nuanced way that makes you think about the industrial military complex of America and the Western world. Saad obviously feels conflicted because of the war in Syria and the fact that those around him don't seem to care when his people were dying. Lola shares a story about her dad.
My dad had to leave Argentina during the Civil War. He never talks about it. It's now in a lie. You have to tell that story. That's how people understand what you were trying to say.
People will never understand.
Well, if that were true, would I still be here?
I think this was such a sweet moment for both characters. Saad, who we really haven't seen or gotten to know that much outside of what he was doing with Maya, and we truly see how he has been traumatized by what happened. And we see that when he is rejected by the people that he's trying to talk to, that it pushes him to further isolation. Lola also makes assumptions later that Saad was talking with a terrorist back in Syria when she lets her friends get in her head, and she reads some messages on his computer. He notices, and this creates a little bit of a rift between them. Saad ends up telling Lola later that he's been communicating with someone that he suspects might be a terrorist. When a bomb threat is called at prom, Saad is assumed to be the person behind it until it is revealed to be Esme that called in a fake bomb threat. Saad's story is very quickly resolved because they don't have much time left to finish up everything. And honestly, I blame Netflix of all things more than the writers here, because I believe if we got more more time, Sod would have had more plot lines and focus. The next class is probably the most diverse the show has been in covering topics that are seen as controversial, like Islamophobia.
So do suicide bombers, for example, think that they're honorable?
Why would I have the inside scoop on suicide bombers?
Well, aren't they mostly Muslim?
Islam does not condone killing.
Well, I don't see any G.I. Joe strapping bombs to their chest.
Instead, they drop them from drones, and calling suicide bombers Muslim is an insult to Muslims everywhere.
Boom. Roasted.
The character Goldie was introduced as a really headstrong, smart feminist. She is also Muslim, but who we've seen on a handful of occasions when she has questioned her own religion.
And then you took off your hijab, and I tried to too because I just really wanted us to be friends. But if I'm being honest, I never felt like myself wearing it. I didn't wear it back home. I'll always be Muslim whether I touch a boy's hand or not. For me, it's different. Every single day feels like a choice between the culture here and my faith. And if you break any rules, you feel like you're not Muslim anymore.
She is confronted with touching other boys, or when she is asked about gay relationships and what her religion says about being gay. She is also one that is very open-minded and doesn't let her religion restrict her from accepting other people. To be honest, I liked Goldie for the little time that we got with her, and I wish we could have had more time to flesh out her doubts about her religion and how her race is viewed.
We just started a discussion on immigration. How long have you lived here?
My whole life.
I'm sorry, I thought...
That brown people can't be from here, or just Muslims.
Okay, chill. It was an innocent mistake.
Is it a mistake? When people ask if I'm bald under here, or think I know about suicide bombers, there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and they're all different.
I'm very sorry, Goldie.
Thank you.
She is attacked by bigots who pull her hijab off in public, completely humiliating and traumatizing her.
Just ignore that.
Are you on their side?
Then take that thing off. We're just trying to...
Those men are murderers, not Muslims. Doesn't your book say it's okay to kill?
Then he won't mind if I help you out. Oh, hey, we...
Stop! You're animals!
I honestly wanted to cry when she started crying to her father.
They attacked me! They tried to take off my job. I don't know, I was just on the way home and I just ran. I just wish I could go back in time and just stay home tonight.
The actress killed it in this scene. It's really sad and infuriating that people are judged by their culture or their race. And this is one of those moments where I just feel completely infuriated, and Degrassi just shined in showcasing Islamophobia. Goldie doesn't really get many plot lines, but from what she does get, I think that the actress does a really good job. I just wish that we could have gotten more plot lines to see the character more realized. Boz is Goldie's brother, and I feel like he was also robbed of screen time. I found him funny on many occasions with how blunt he was. I think there could have been a chance to have his character mature more and learn from himself. He seems to be a nice enough brother to Goldie, but we don't really see him or VJ having any plot lines outside of being the friends to Hunter. I do want to acknowledge Degrassi High because it was also progressive for its time, depicting an interracial couple.
One of the episodes which was, I think, a little shocking that we actually got as much negative feelings from people was BLT dating Michelle. There was a lot of people that were like, how dare you have a black guy and a white girl dating?
And I know that sounds like something that shouldn't be controversial at this point, but in the 80s and 90s, and even some people now still look down on it.
And it said something along the lines, to the producer of Degrassi, you must have been born by a buzzard and hatched by the sun to allow a black and a white character to kiss on television.
I want to acknowledge again that Degrassi has always been progressive. Degrassi High has the same problem, though, that the next generation has, and that the main cast of characters that are focused on are white characters, and the brown characters really just serve to be the side characters to make the whole cast look a little bit more diverse. Yik Yu was a character from Degrassi High that had a few plot lines on the show, but not as many as the other characters. It's revealed that his parents left Vietnam during the war. There wasn't as much of a focus on the people of color in Degrassi High as well, but I will acknowledge that this was a product of its time, and the writers of Degrassi have improved on racial depictions since this point. However, there is always room for improvement and criticism. Cultural appropriation is also a problem in a lot of media. We see it all the time, but I also want to talk about it here and where this can be learned from.
How come everyone jumped down Zoe's throat for playing a geisha, but no one cared that I was playing Japanese? Well, is it because I'm Asian? There's only one kind of Asian? Because I'm sure you know Korean and Japanese aren't the same.
Boom. Roasted.
Sav was introduced as an immature sophomore that was into stickers and liked music.
It's been that way for half a year. It's like we belong.
You clam up! Ali is super intelligent and cares a lot about what people think. She's your stereotypical teenage girl that's really into boys and fairly judgmental of others. She also doesn't really have great taste in guys, and she ends up in an abusive relationship over time. Sav and Ali get a fair amount of focus, but they definitely could have gotten a lot more focus since they ran out of ideas for Sav that they put him in a relationship with a teacher. We learn about their home life, that their parents are traditional Muslims that want them to marry another Muslim. This becomes a huge conflict for Sav and Anya's relationship when her parents won't accept her because she isn't Muslim. I'm not Muslim, so it isn't my place to say how well Sav and Ali's parents are depicted, or if they are depicted like stereotypes. But I will say that I have seen the arranged marriage trope done quite a bit in American media, so it is a little bit of a tired trope, and I feel like this conflict of the arranged marriage thing was really only brought up so it could be a conflict between Sav and Anya. I did find the parents to be stereotypically strict Muslim parents at first, but I do think they ease up on their kids over time when they see how their expectations might be affecting their children. It doesn't help that Degrassi uses stereotypical musical cues though either. Sav and Ali seem to be less connected to their Muslim beliefs than their parents. Other than the arranged marriage for Sav, we don't really ever see Sav or Ali question their beliefs or connection to being Muslim. I'm not sure if the writers never got around to this or maybe never thought to, which is why I think they improved in a way with Goldie as a character. I do think that, again, most of the writers are white and writing from the perspective of being white. It makes sense why Ali and Sav's plotlines never delved too deeply into their culture or their perspective on it. Linda Shankar and Raymond A. Black are both Indo-Guyanese. The actors for Ali and Sav's father is Trinidadian, and the actor for their mother was born in Dublin. The name Bandari originates from Nepal and India, so I am to assume that the Bandaris are Indian. Obviously, the actors don't have much connection to being Muslim, and one of them isn't even the race of Indian. I don't blame the actors necessarily here, but I think that when it comes to casting, there should be a lot more of a priority and effort into finding people that fit the cultural roles they are looking for, because it also allows for opportunity for actors to get their foot in the door that otherwise might not have had a chance. Although I am aware of what they were trying to do with the refugees from Syria, the actors are American, and it can be a bit of an issue, especially when they are asked to act with accents as if they are from Syria.
Hi guys, my name is Dahlia Gavian. I am new to the Degrassi Next Class cast,
which I'm not too sure is a good thing to do. I don't know. I, of course, am not one to say personally if it's okay or the right call, but I can understand those that don't agree with the choice to do this. I think it's important to bring this up because Indian Americans are still asked to put on accents in some of the roles they play, even if they don't have one. I mean, look at Black Panther, look at T'Challa. Chadwick Boseman didn't have an accent, so we do see this all the time. The cultural appropriation thing that happens all the time. It's not a Pooh levels, but I also do think it's something that I should acknowledge.
I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh. Gonna change anything.
Honestly, I think that Asian characters in this show are done the worst. There are no indigenous characters either. None of the Asian characters have fully realized storylines, even the ones that are casted as main characters. The only character that is Asian that we see get the most plot lines was Manny, who is Filipino. Her parents are traditional, and that caused a lot of issues for Manny with her father specifically. These very traditional beliefs and this mindset affected Manny and how she viewed herself for a while. We saw an episode where she celebrates a traditional Filipino party to celebrate turning 18, but there isn't too much focus on Manny being Filipino, and that doesn't really surprise me. But she is a character that is prominent on the show and does get a lot of focus, but she is the only character, the only Southeast Asian character that gets any focus. Winston was done dirty on this show. He didn't get any plot lines. He was introduced as Miles's friend, not really getting any of his own stories. He got one plot line where he challenged Drew, who he thought was abusing his position as class president, but that's it. It's a subplot, and it wasn't really that interesting. And it sucks because Winston is an interesting character. He's funny.
He squeezed my hand while I was reading to him.
That's great, yeah.
creative and always looking out for Miles. He's awkward and accepting of a person. It's just such a shame. Leia was barely a character, even though she was credited as a main character. She only had one plot line and she was pretty forgettable. Other minor Asian characters were just really conflict starters. When you really take a step back from the show, you just really see how little Asian characters were represented. Even Esme, who was introduced as a main character, was still seen as a conflict starter and not really a fully realized character. They just really could not include Asian characters in the stories at all. It's just honestly astounding. I'm not shocked by this either, because if you look at it from a wider context, Asian Americans are not really well represented in media in general. Statistically, they have a very low representation in media, and I'm not saying that we haven't improved, but we still have a long way to go. I think for white people, it's hard for them to hear what people of color are saying about representation, because they are always the ones being represented, so they don't really see the problem and they think it's just people overreacting or being upset over nothing. Whiteness is the status quo and what is expected. That's why we have such a cultural divide right now, where people are saying representation is woke. These discussions and criticisms are good so we can improve with representation in media. That should always be the goal. Everyone should feel included. This has been a long-ass discussion with a lot to digest. Degrassi has depicted racism well before, but it also has excluded people of color from representation. That is something that cannot be ignored. We need to understand where we went wrong so we can get better in pointing these things out. So we can create a discussion and work towards including more people of color as consultants and writers and casting directors. This is how we change the way people of color are represented, and this is how we allow more people to also have opportunity. Diversity is something we need to recognize because it's something that shapes all of us. Diversity is important to acknowledge, not just with race, but with gender, with sexuality, and other things that represent us, because everyone is different. There isn't just one type of person. Every culture has its own different, unique perspectives on things. I hope that you got something from this, because this was something I've always wanted to talk about. Well, that's all I got. I'll see you in the next one.
It's been that way for half a year. It's like we belong.